end up with a prison system that may subject more of our own citizens to it than any other country in history has. Now, he wrote that article, and I forget, that was in the New Yorker. But Bobby, you were part of that article. He talked about you. Hellhole was the name of the argument, the article that was in the New Yorker, and Terry Waite was also talked about in that. Anderson, excuse me, not Waite. Terry Anderson. Yeah, you very good. You corrected me. You spent years in solitary, and you know, where's your position?
I spoke 2 or 3 times with Gawande, Dr. Gawande, and I wasn't aware of Anderson or McCain. And I explained to him the conditions of the confinement, the effects of it and whatnot. And it appears that what I described and what McCain and Anderson described was identical. It was the same thing. Right? You know, prison management, right, isn't about, corrections isn't about corrections. Corrections is about job security. That's the main thing to keep it in the forefront, right? Segregation units are part of command and control. Mentally ill prisoners, when they closed the mental institutions, those that couldn't function in the street, they threw in jails. They can't function in prison populations, they stash them in segregation units. All right? That's the mindset. And what you get from administrations is only the worst of the worst go into these segregation units. It's simply not true. It's a lie. These units are simply used for command and control. They can't control mentally ill people, so they stash them in there, which exacerbates their mental illness. And it makes sane, normal people become insane. All right? These units are torture, and it's hard to convey to a John Q. citizen who doesn't have an understanding of what's happening to the human mind. People are taken directly from these units and dropped into the street, which is criminal. You do not want a mad dog in a cage to be suddenly released in your community. That's what's happening.
That's what's happening, yeah, that's the
That's
frightening part.
exactly
Right.
what's happening. And the shame is a lot of this stuff is like experimental. And I'll give you a good example. Now, segregated federal units target Muslim and activists. The CCR, which is the Constitutional,
That's the Center for Constitutional Rights,
right.
right?
They filed AREF versus Holden in the DC District Court on behalf of 5 current and former prisoners of units in Terre Haute, Indiana and Marion, Illinois. 2 other plaintiffs are the spouses of prisoners. The CMUs, which is the management units, control management units, were secretly opened under the Bush administration in 2006 and 7, respectively, and were designed to monitor and control the communications of certain prisoners and to isolate them from other prisoners in the outside world. This is brainwashing, do you understand that?
Yeah, well, this is the development, as we talked about on the other, earlier, of terrorists.
But listen,
Okay?
if you get, there's like 23 steps in the North Korean brainwashing, which came out of the Korean War.
Yeah, right.
That's exactly what you see happening here, but it's more sophisticated. But it's the same concept.
But it's the same concept, it's
Right.
the same steps as you go through.
Right.
Now,
The
some of
isolation, the communications.
We gotta know that some of our listeners are gonna say, what are these guys talking about? We're talking about a brainwashing system, there's steps to do it, there's a way that you scientifically,
Okay, we'll back up.
But we back, yeah.
In
back up.
52.
Right,
When the Korean War went down,
right.
American prisoners were captured and in control of the North Koreans, and they employed brainwashing tactics on them that worked.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why? They got these guys spilling their beans.
Right,
And there were 23 basic steps to it,
right,
all right?
right.
We took those 23 steps, refined them,
Refine them.
and
right.
used them on our own
Right,
prisoners.
okay.
And practiced so that we would be able to have our troops be able to resist.
Right.
But here, let me continue with this, all right? Transfer to the CMU are not explained, nor are prisoners told how release into a less restrictive confinement may be earned, as there is no review process. Lawyers say that because these transfers are not based on fact or discipline for infractions, a pattern of religious and political discrimination and retaliation for prisoners lawfully advocating has emerged. The 5 plaintiffs in the RF were designated to 2 CMUs despite having relatively or totally clean disciplinary histories, and none of the plaintiffs have received any communications related disciplinary infractions in the last decade. Several of the plaintiffs expect to serve the entire remaining duration of their sentences in the CMU. Now, this is experimental. This is, what
Yeah,
they're doing
right.
is they're taking human beings that, you know,
This is so.
my punishment
Right.
is the sentence. I wasn't sentenced to prison to be punished. Being placed in prison deprived of my liberties, that was the
That was
punishment.
supposed to be
All right?
punishment.
Now,
Right.
within the prison system, there are rules and regulations.
Right.
If I violate the rules and regulations, then I can be punished
Right.
for breaking those rules.
Breaking their rules.
That's not what's happening here.
No.
People are being punished as an experiment.
Yeah, exactly
They
right.
did nothing wrong. And at the women caprice of some prison administrator, they're placed in segregation units and they're studied. To what, how does this feel, how does that feel? And that's cruel and unusual punishment under the 8th Amendment.
Oh, well, this is not, this is social isolation, and exactly what you're talking about, it's an experiment in social isolation to see what happens to individuals in their use in prison.
Listen, chimpanzees
Right.
can't speak,
Okay,
you know what I mean? And they're kind of expensive, they're like from $25,000 to $50,000, right? Too expensive. Prisoners are much cheaper, they don't cost
it
anything.
costs you nothing.
Right? So what they do is they're gonna experiment on these individuals and then apply those tactics to the enemy,
Exactly.
you know? And it's really bad because like the Geneva Convention and stuff, when you ignore that, right? It's like Bush with his preemptive striking and all that other crap, right? You put American soldiers' lives at risk when you do that. If it's okay for you to do it, then it's okay for the enemy to do it. If it's okay for the United States to torture somebody, then it's okay for the enemy to torture Americans.
Yeah, that's,
You know, it's
Well-
insane. And they don't care. This is the problem, is they don't care. These are Americans. And under the guys, oh, they're prisoners. 97% of the people in prison are coming to the street.
they're coming back out.
And the question really is how do you want them back in the street? Better than they went in or worse? They're coming out worse.
Exactly.
Because the prisons are not doing their job. All right? And this is what's got to be stopped. We've got to stop torturing people.
Well, we were on a thing hoping things were getting better. You know, we were
They're getting
hoping,
worse.
and they're getting worse. We were hoping that the programs were getting better. We were hoping that they know there is a way that if you can brainwash somebody to do one thing, and you can make terrorists out of them, then you can
Why
turn that
not?
around and do the other way, and make sure that they're productive citizens and have the things that they need.
No, you don't make productive citizens out of them. That's called rehabilitation, and they don't do that.
They don't, I know they don't, but we know we know they know how. We know how, so we know they
Oh,
know
no,
how.
listen, they don't have a vested interest in putting themselves out of work.
Absolutely.
And when you rehabilitate prisoners, what happens is you reduce the prison population, then you don't need as many guards. When you don't need as many guards and prisoners, you can start closing prisoners, they're going out of business. That's why